Earl Danko had swept the same 40 feet of stamping-line floor for 26 years. He knew every seam in that concrete. He knew where the oil pooled after a rain, and where the light came through the high windows at 4 in the afternoon. And on a Tuesday night in the Union Hall, when the meeting was about to start, the steward waved him off a folding chair like a man shooing a fly. "Chairs are for men who talk, Earl." Earl stood at the back, lunch pail in his hand. He did not argue. Then Ray Szczepanski, president of Local 419, leaned into the microphone and got his laugh. "Slow Earl's gonna audit the books," he said. "Boys, he counts on his fingers." 200 men laughed. 200. Earl reached into his shirt pocket, took out a dues receipt, and wrote one number on the back of it. Then he put it away. What Ray didn't know was that for 2 years, back in the 60s, Earl had been the fund's assistant clerk. And Earl never threw a carbon copy away in his life. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one find you where you are, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me tell you about Earl. Rennick, Ohio, 1972. If you've never been, picture a town built around a single sound. The stamping presses at Halverson. You could feel them in your teeth from the parking lot. A big, flat plant the color of a rain cloud, and around it, the houses, small and square, with aluminum awnings and vegetable gardens gone to seed in October. Men worked at Halverson, or men left Rennick. That was the arithmetic of the place. Earl was one of the men who stayed. He was 52 that year. Not a big man, not a small one. He had the kind of face you'd forget on the bus and remember at a funeral. Gray in his hair, coming in slow, the way frost comes in on a window. Careful hands. That was the thing people noticed, if they noticed anything. Earl checked a gauge twice, every time. He'd set the part, read the number, set it down, pick it up, read it again. The young men found this hilarious. They called him Slow Earl. He never fought it. He'd just nod, like they'd told him the weather. Slow Earl. Because he read a gauge twice. Because he chewed his sandwich slow. Because when Ray Szczepanski told a joke, Earl was the last one to laugh, and sometimes he didn't laugh at all, and that unsettled a certain kind of man more than any insult could. His partner on the line was Tom Doyle. 19 years, the two of them, side by side at the number 4 press. Tom did the talking for both of them, which suited Earl fine. Tom was loud and warm and quick, and he'd cover Earl's slow spots with a joke and cover his own mistakes with a bigger one. They ate lunch together every day out of 2 dented pails. Tom drank his coffee black. Earl took cream. That was about the size of their difference, and it never once mattered. Then, on a March morning, the press came down wrong. I'll tell it plain, because Earl would want it told plain. A die shifted. Tom's hand was where it shouldn't have been for a half a second, and a half a second is all a stamping press asks of you. It wasn't the kind of accident that kills a man in front of everybody. It was the slow kind. Tom went to the county hospital, and he came home, and he went back to the hospital, and the thing that started in his hand worked its way up his arm and into his blood, and by August, Tom Doyle was gone. 51 years old. The whole line took a day off for the funeral. Ray Szczepanski gave a speech at the hall about brotherhood. Somebody passed a hat. And then the presses started again the next morning, because the presses always start again. Helen Doyle was 50, married to Tom for 26 years, which was longer than Earl had swept that floor. They'd never had children. It had been the two of them in a little house on Sumner Street, with a porch that Tom was always meaning to fix. Now it was just Helen, and a porch nobody was going to fix. Here is the part that matters, the part that started everything. The union had a benefit, a death and survivor benefit, paid out of the fund the men fed every single week. When a brother died, his widow got a survivor's check, $214 a month. It wasn't a fortune, but in Rennick in 1972, $214 was the difference between keeping a house and losing it. It was groceries and the gas bill and the property tax, and it was the local telling a widow, "We did not forget your husband." Helen got the check for 2 months. Then it stopped. She called the fund office. A man named Marty Kwiat told her there was a problem with the paperwork. She called again. Same answer. Paperwork. She wrote a letter. She got a form back, and the form said her claim was under review. And the review never ended, and the checks never came. And by the time the leaves turned, Helen Doyle was 2 months behind on the house that Tom had paid into for 26 years. Earl found out the way Earl found out most things, slowly and by accident. He'd taken to visiting Helen on Sundays. It started because Tom would have wanted somebody too. Earl would drive over after church with a bag of groceries, a can of coffee, black, out of habit, before he remembered and switched it for cream, because he was drinking it now, not Tom. Some bread, a little meat if the week had been good. He couldn't quite afford it. He did it anyway. He'd sit at Helen's kitchen table and not say much, and Helen would talk enough for two, the way Tom used to, and that was its own kind of comfort for both of them. One Sunday in October, Helen wasn't talking. She was staring at a stack of mail. "They stopped the check, Earl," she said. He set the coffee down. "Which check?" "Tom's survivor, the 214. She pushed the papers across the table. "They keep saying paperwork. I don't know what paperwork. Tom paid every week. You know he did. You stood right next to him." Earl looked at the form. Under review. He read it once. Then, because he was Earl, he read it again. And something in him that had been quiet for a very long time turned over in its sleep. Because Earl knew that fund. Not the way a member knows it, from the outside, from the meetings and the dues stamp in the little book. He knew it from the inside. For 2 years, back in 1966 and 67, Earl Danko had been the fund's assistant clerk, before Marty Kwiat, before Ray was president. Earl had sat in that little office and posted the contributions by hand, $9.25 a man, week after week, into the big green ledgers. He'd typed the benefit checks. He'd known the widows by name. And Earl, who never threw anything away, still had the carbons. "I've got a box in my cellar," he said, mostly to himself. "What's that?" "Nothing, Helen." He folded the form back along its crease and handed it to her. "Nothing yet. Eat your lunch." He didn't go to the cellar that night. That's the thing about Earl you have to understand. He didn't move fast, not because he couldn't, but because he'd learned, somewhere along the way, that a thing done fast is a thing done twice. He drove home. He thought about Tom. He thought about the number he half remembered on a page. And he decided, the careful way he decided everything, to ask the polite question first. That was wave 1. The next Friday, at the fund office window, Earl waited until the line was gone, and it was just him and Marty Kwiat. Marty was 39, soft in the middle, with a nice watch that Earl noticed and filed away without meaning to. Treasurer of the benefit fund. Ray's man. "Marty," Earl said, "Helen Doyle's survivor check stopped. I want to understand why." Marty didn't even look up from his adding machine. "Under review, Earl." "Reviewing what?" "Tom paid 19 years. I posted some of those years myself back when I clerked." Now Marty looked up. Just for a second. Something passed behind his eyes, quick, like a fish under ice. Then it was gone, and he was bored again. It's a process, Earl. These things take time. You want, I'll have somebody look into it. I'd appreciate that. Sure. Marty went back to his machine. The conversation was over. Earl stood at the window another moment, then nodded and left. But here is what Earl did that most men wouldn't have. He went home, and he sat down at his own kitchen table, and he wrote it out. A letter, dated, to the fund office. He set down, in his plain hand, exactly what he'd asked, and exactly what he'd been told. Helen Doyle, widow of Thomas Doyle, member in good standing, 19 years. Survivor benefit suspended without written cause. He asked for the cause in writing. He kept a carbon of the letter for himself, because of course he did. And he mailed the top copy certified, and he stapled the little green receipt to his copy. Warning number 1, in writing, dated. Nobody wrote back. 3 weeks went by, then 4. And Earl, who was patient but not asleep, filed a formal grievance. That was wave 2, and it had a witness. The witness was a kid named Denny Ref, 22 years old, just made shop steward, still proud of the title, still wearing it like a new coat. Denny happened to be in the office the afternoon Earl's grievance form came across Ray Szczepanski's desk. Denny told the rest of it later, to a lot of people, when it mattered. But at the time, he just watched. Ray picked up Earl's grievance, read the name at the top, Danko, and he laughed. Not a big laugh, a small, private one, the kind that's worse. He held the form up so Denny could see it, like they were in on something together. "You know what this is, kid?" Ray said. "This is slow Earl thinking he found something." And then Ray Szczepanski tore the grievance form in half, then in half again, and dropped it in the wastebasket by his desk, and looked right at Denny while he did it, daring the kid to say anything. Denny didn't say anything. Denny was 22, and the title was new, and Ray was the president. So the boy looked at his shoes. Later that week, Earl asked Ray, in the hall, careful and quiet, whether his grievance had been received. Ray smiled at him. That smile. "File all you want, Danko," Ray said. "File 100 of them. Warning number 2, witnessed. Now, you'd think a man would take the hint. 2 doors closed, a polite question brushed off, a letter ignored, a grievance torn up in front of a boy. Most men would have gone home to Helen and said, 'I tried, honey, there's nothing to be done.' And they'd have been telling the truth, and nobody would have blamed them. Earl didn't quit, but he didn't get loud either. That's the whole trick of him. He got quieter, he got careful. He went to the meetings, and he stood at the back, and he listened. And he waited for the thing he could feel coming, the way you feel a storm in your knees before the sky knows about it. It came at the November meeting. The Union Hall was a low brick building 2 blocks off Main, with a linoleum floor and 150 folding chairs and a raised platform at one end where the officers sat. On a big meeting night, they'd cram 200 men in there, coats over the chair backs, cigarette smoke hanging under the ceiling lights like weather. This was a big night. Dues business and the first talk of the new hall. Earl came in late off his shift, still in his work clothes, lunch pail in his hand because he hadn't been home. The chairs were full. He went to stand along the back wall with a few other latecomers, and that would have been fine. That was normal. Except the steward that night decided to make it a thing. "You can't stand there all night, Earl," the steward said, loud enough. "Grab a—" And then he looked, and every chair was taken, and he grinned. "Well, chairs are for men who talk, Earl. You don't talk." A few men chuckled. Earl nodded and stayed where he was. He should have been forgotten right there. He wasn't, because Ray Szczepanski was watching from the platform. And Ray had a mean streak that fed on an audience. And Ray had heard from Marty that slow Earl had been asking questions about the fund. So when the fund report came up on the agenda, Ray couldn't help himself. Marty quit, read the treasurer's numbers off a sheet. Balances. contributions. All of it fine, all of it fast, the way a man reads a thing he doesn't want questions about. And when Marty sat down, Ray leaned into the microphone and looked straight down the length of the hall to the back wall where Earl stood. "Now, before anybody asks," Ray said, "I know we got an expert in the house tonight. Slow Earl's gonna audit the books for us." He waited. "Boys, he counts on his fingers." The hall went up. 200 men. It rolled from the front chairs to the back, that big, loose laughter that a crowd does when it's tired and mean and glad to have somebody to be glad about not being. It washed over Earl, where he stood against the cold brick, lunch pail in his hand, and it kept going, and Ray let it, drinking it, and somebody near the front called out, "Show 'em your fingers, Earl!" And the laugh came again. Earl did not turn red. He did not look at his shoes the way Denny had. He stood there and let it wash over him and past him. And when it had mostly died down, he did one thing. He reached into his shirt pocket. He took out a dues receipt, the little slip they gave you when you paid your 9 1/4. He took the stub of a pencil out of the same pocket, and he wrote one number on the back of the receipt. A single number. Then he folded it once and put it back in his pocket and buttoned the pocket shut. Nobody saw what the number was. A few men near the back saw him write it and thought it was funny. Slow Earl taking notes, and they nudged each other. But the receipt went in the pocket, and the button went shut, and the meeting moved on to the new hall. That number was the beginning of the end for 4 men. They just didn't know it yet. Neither did Earl, not entirely. But he knew this much, standing there against the brick with 200 laughs still ringing in the room. Something had been opened tonight that would have to be closed. An account, in front of these exact men. And Earl Danko, who read every gauge twice, was going to be very, very sure of his numbers before he closed it. He drove home in the dark. He did not slam the truck door. He did not curse Ray Szczepanski to the windshield the way you or I might have. He made himself a cup of coffee with cream, and he sat at the kitchen table for a while, not doing anything, just sitting, letting the pain of it settle into something harder and quieter than pain. Then he went down to the cellar. Earl's cellar was the cellar of a careful man. Shelves he'd built himself, jars of nails sorted by size, a workbench swept clean, and in the corner, under a tarp, boxes. Earl kept things. Tax records back to the Truman years, every owner's manual for every appliance he'd ever bought, and a shoebox, a plain brown shoebox, with the name of a shoedian store faded on the end that he hadn't opened in a very long time. He set it on the workbench under the bare bulb and lifted the lid. Carbons, sheet after sheet of thin blue-black carbon paper, the kind that came behind the top copy on the old accounting forms. 2 years of them, 66 and 67, the years Earl had clerked the fund. Every contribution he'd posted, every check he'd typed, the ghost copy of every number that had passed through that little office while Earl sat there being careful. He'd taken them home when he left the clerk's job, the way he took everything home, and he'd never once looked at them again. He looked at them now. He sat on a stool under the bulb, and he read them the way he read a gauge. Slow. Twice. And the first thing he understood, before anything else, was that he could still do this. The columns made sense to him. The 9 1/4 a man, times the men, times the weeks. He'd typed 1,000 of these entries with his own 2 hands. His fingers knew the shape of the fund the way they knew the shape of the number 4 press. He didn't have the current books, of course. Marty had those. But Earl had 2 things Marty didn't count on. He had the carbons, which showed how the fund used to run, clean, the year Earl kept it. And he had his own 2 ears, because Marty read the current balances aloud at every meeting off that sheet, and Earl had been standing at the back listening for months. So Earl started to build a picture. It took weeks. He'd come home off his shift, eat something standing at the sink, and go down to the cellar. He wrote the meeting numbers on one side of a big sheet of butcher paper, the ones Marty read aloud, month by month, as best Earl could remember and reconstruct them. On the other side, he wrote what the fund should hold, working it forward from his clean carbon baseline. The dues hadn't changed much. The membership he could count. It was arithmetic, slow, careful, double-checked arithmetic, and nobody on this earth was better suited to it than the man they called Slow Earl. The 2 columns didn't match, not by a little. The fund, by Earl's math, should have been holding a good deal more than Marty's sheet said it held. Every quarter it came up short. Not a wild, obvious short that a member would catch in a meeting. A quiet short. A skim. Like a man taking a cup of water out of a bucket every day, where you'd never see the level drop, unless you'd measured the bucket yourself the year before. Earl had measured the bucket. He didn't get excited. I want you to understand that. A different man would have stood up in the next meeting and shouted it. Earl folded the butcher paper along its crease and put it in the shoebox with the carbons, and he thought, I need more than a memory of what Marty read. I need the paper. And he started going to the hall in the afternoons, on his days off, and asking, real polite, to see the old meeting minutes, the official ones, the ones with the numbers written down. That was the first time Ray got uneasy, because Denny Ref, the young steward, was the one who pulled the minutes for Earl the first couple of times. And Denny mentioned it to somebody, and it got back to Ray that Slow Earl was coming around asking for old records. And Ray, up on his little platform in his own head, felt the smallest cold draft on the back of his neck. He told Marty to keep an eye out. He told the office to make Danko fill out a request form for anything he wanted. He put small stones in Earl's path, the way small men do. Earl filled out the forms, slow, in his plain hand. And he got the minutes, because they were the members' minutes, and Earl was a member. And there was only so far even Ray could go without making the very thing he feared look real. With the real minutes in front of him, Earl's picture got sharp. The quarterly short was real. He could see it now in black ink, not just memory. And there was a second thing, a bigger thing, that the minutes handed him. The new Union Hall. For a year now, Ray had been pushing the new hall. The old brick building was too small, he said, undignified, and the local had the money to build. There'd been votes to authorize it, and a builder had been chosen, and a contract signed, and the numbers were all right there in the minutes for anybody who cared to add them up. Most men didn't. A union hall costs what it costs, they figured, and Ray's handling it. Earl added them up, twice. The contract was padded, by his count, by about $70,000 over what the work should run. $70,000 on a job that size, in Rennick in 1972, was not a rounding error. It was a house, several houses, and the builder who'd won the contract was a firm Earl didn't know, out of Toledo, with a name that meant nothing to him. So Earl did what Earl did. He drove to the county courthouse on a Saturday, and he looked the firm up in the deed and tax records, because a careful man knows that the truth about money is usually written down somewhere by the government, if you're patient enough to find it. And on the deed for that builder's property, and on a couple of other papers Earl copied down in pencil, was an address. Earl knew that address. It was Curtis Vane's house. Curtis Vane was the company's labor relations man, Halverson's fellow, the one who sat across the table from Ray at contract time and was supposed to be on the other side. 46, smooth, good suits, the kind of man who called every worker "my friend" and remembered none of their names. The company paid Curtis Vane to keep the peace with the union. And here was the union's new hall being built by a firm that shared a roof with Curtis Vane on the county deed. Earl sat in his truck in the courthouse parking lot with his pencil notes on his knee. And he understood, finally and completely, what he was looking at. It wasn't one man skimming a fund. It was a ring. Ray taking his cut out of the dues, quiet, quarter by quarter. Marty covering it in the books, and Curtis Vane, the company man, running money the other direction through a padded contract for a hall the men were paying to build. Labor peace. Everybody at the top wet their beak, and the bill went to the rank and file, $9.25 at a time, and to a widow on Sumner Street who couldn't pay her property tax. A different man might have driven straight to a newspaper, or a lawyer, or Ray's front door with his fists. Earl drove home and got out the bylaws. Every member of Local 419 had a copy of the bylaws, a little booklet, gray cover, that most men used as a coaster. Earl had never used his as a coaster. He'd read it once when he joined, and he read it again now, slow, twice, at the kitchen table, with the coffee going cold at his elbow, looking for the one thing he needed. Not a way to fight Ray, a way to make the paper do it. Because Earl had learned, in a life of being underestimated, that a quiet man's only real weapon is the rule everybody else was too proud to read. He found it in Article 11, Section 4. Earl read it 3 times, to be sure, moving his lips a little, the way he did. Any 25 members in good standing, it said, may petition the International for a trusteeship audit of the local's funds. 25 signatures, that was all. 25 men, paid up, signing one petition, and the International, the big union, above Ray, above the local entirely, would have to send in a trustee to open the books. Ray couldn't stop it. Marty couldn't cover it. It went over their heads. And there was one more line, and Earl read that line the most careful of all. Once a petition was docketed by the International, there was a window. 30 days. Once the clock started, the local's officers couldn't move money, couldn't ratify new contracts, couldn't paper anything over, without it landing inside the audit. 30 days, hard. A trap door with a timer on it. Earl sat back in his chair. He had the carbons, he had the minutes. He had the courthouse deed with Curtis Vane's address on the builder's paper. He had a quarterly skim he could prove, and a padded contract he could prove, and a widow's stolen pension he could name. And he had, in Article 11, Section 4, the one lever that would make 200 men who'd laughed at him watch the whole thing come apart, lawfully, by their own bylaws, with no fists in it at all. All he needed was 25 signatures, and the nerve to start the clock. He should have started it that night. This is the part where Earl's blind spot lives, and I'll tell it to you straight, because it's the part that nearly cost him everything. Earl believed that doing it exactly by the book, slow and careful and twice checked, would be enough on its own. That if he just got every number perfect, the rightness of it would carry. He didn't yet understand that Ray and Curtis and Marty were not sitting still, that they had a clock of their own, that the very hall contract Earl had just proven was crooked was scheduled to come up for a final ratification vote, and Curtis Vane was pushing to hold that vote fast, to close it before any audit could ever bite. Earl thought he had time. He always thought he had time. It was the one gauge he never checked twice. He went up from the cellar late, near midnight, and he stood in the kitchen for a while. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He went to the drawer where he kept his own things, and he took out Tom Doyle's union card. He'd had it since the funeral. Helen had given it to him, laminated, the little card that said Thomas Doyle, member, Local 419, with the year of joining stamped on it, and 19 years of dues stamps that Tom had paid 9 1/4 for, every single week, without missing one. Earl had carried it in his own wallet for a while, and then put it in the drawer, because carrying it hurt. He took it out now, and he looked at it under the kitchen light. Then he went back down the cellar stairs, one at a time, holding the rail, and he laid Tom Doyle's card on top of the shoebox full of carbons. Right on top, like a man laying a stone on a grave. And he stood there and looked at it for a long moment. "All right, Tom," he said, to the cellar, to nobody. "All right." He'd start the signatures. 25 men, paid up, willing to sign. He knew who he'd ask first, and who he'd ask last, and who he'd never ask at all. He'd send the petition, certified, to the International, the way he sent everything, with a carbon for himself and one damning page for them to chew on. He'd start the 30-day clock, and he would say nothing to anyone at the plant, and he would sweep his 40 feet of floor and nod at Ray Szczepanski, and wait for the paper to do what fists never could. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It was a careful man's plan. What Earl didn't know, standing in his cellar at midnight, with his dead partner's card in his hand, was that up at the hall, Curtis Vane had already made a phone call. The ratification meeting for the new hall was being moved up, weeks up, to the first Tuesday of December. They were going to close the vote on the crooked contract, in front of the same 200 men, before Earl Danko could get his 25 names on a page. The race had started, and only one of the two runners knew he was in it. The petition went out on a Tuesday. Earl mailed it himself at the main post office downtown, not the little branch near the plant where a man might be seen. He paid for certified. He paid for the green card that would come back with a signature on it. He put the receipt in his shirt pocket, behind the dues receipt, with the one number on the back, and he buttoned the pocket the way he buttoned everything. Then he went to work and swept his floor. That was the whole trick of it now. To do nothing. To do nothing so well that nobody could see the doing. Earl was good at nothing. He'd had practice. He came in at 6, like always. He got his broom from the corner by the die racks. He walked his 40 feet of stamping line floor, up and back, the same 40 feet he'd walked for 26 years. And he pushed the metal shavings and the cigarette ends and the paper cups into a gray pile, and he carried it out. He nodded at the men. He nodded at the foreman. When Ray Szczepanski came down from the hall to walk the floor like he owned it, Earl nodded at Ray, too. "Earl," Ray said. "Ray," Earl said. And that was all. That was the whole conversation. A quiet man's whole conversation. Inside, Earl was counting the days. The International would docket the petition. Once it was docketed, the 30-day window opened. 30 days, where no officer of the local could move a dime or ratify a contract without a federal trustee's eyes on it. 30 days. That was the trap. It was already set. It was already in the mail. He just had to keep sweeping until the spring went off. But here is the thing about a quiet plan. Other men can hear the quiet, even when they can't hear the plan. Ray had gotten a letter too. The International sent acknowledgments. That was the law. When a petition came in, they sent a form letter to the local's president, saying a matter had been received and was under review. It didn't say what. It didn't say who. But Ray Szczepanski had been president of Local 419 for 11 years, and he knew what an acknowledgement letter smelled like, and it smelled like trouble. So Ray got nervous, and a nervous crooked man does what crooked men do. He tries to clean up. Earl heard about it from the second shift. Marty Kwiat had been in the fund office 3 nights running with the door shut, the little adding machine going till 10. Boxes of old statements coming up out of the file room. Marty telling the janitor he didn't need to bother with the office. He'd get it himself, thanks. Earl heard all this, and his face did not change. He kept sweeping. But down in his chest something went tight, because he knew what Marty was doing. Marty was trying to make the current books match. He was papering the whole. It didn't matter. That was what they couldn't see. Marty could paper this quarter and last quarter and every quarter he could reach. He could make the new books sing. But Marty could not reach 1966. He could not reach the shoebox in Earl's cellar. He could not reach the carbons of the ledgers as they were, clean, before the skim ever started, in Earl's own hand, initialed and dated by a 29-year-old assistant clerk who never threw a copy away in his life. You cannot clean a stain you don't know is there. And they did not know the shoebox was there. Still, Marty cleaning house meant Ray was hunting. And a hunting man looks at everybody. He looked at Earl on a Thursday. Earl was punching out. The time clock was by the door, the old kind, the kind that chunked when it stamped your card. And Earl had his card in the slot, and the clock had just chunked when Ray came up behind him. Close. Too close. Earl could smell the cigar on him. "You been in the office, Earl?" Ray said. Just like that, flat, watching. Earl took his card out of the slot. He looked at the numbers stamped on it. He put it in the rack. He did all of it slow, the way he did everything, the way that had earned him the name, and the slowness gave him the half-second he needed to keep his voice level. "Just my grievance, Ray," Earl said. "Back in the spring, you remember." He let it sit. He let Ray remember tearing that grievance in half in front of Denny Ref. He let Ray remember saying, "File all you want, Danko." And he watched Ray's face decide that the grievance was the whole of it. That slow Earl had come around about his little widow's paperwork and gotten told no and gone back to his broom like a whipped dog, because that was the story Ray already believed, and men believe the story they already have. Ray's shoulders came down an inch. "Yeah," Ray said. "Well, leave the office to the officers." "Sure, Ray," Earl said. And Ray walked off toward the parking lot, toward the car that Earl knew now cost more than a fund treasurer made in a year. And Earl stood by the time clock and breathed out slow through his nose. His hands were steady. He made sure of that before he looked at them. Steady. He'd learned that a long time ago, on the line. You don't let the press see your hand shake. The press doesn't care, but the men do. That was cycle 1, the near thing at the time clock, the relief after. Cycle 2 came quieter, and it came from 2 people Ray never thought to watch. The first was Denny Ref. Denny was 22 years old, and he had laughed at the meeting. He'd laughed when Ray said, "Slow Earl counts on his fingers," laughed with the 200, and then gone home and not been able to sleep, because Denny had also been the one who saw Ray tear Earl's grievance in half. And a man can hold both of those things in his head for only so long before one of them starts to rot. Denny came to Earl's house on a Sunday night, stood on the porch with his hat in his hand like it was 1935. "I want to help," Denny said. "Whatever you're doing. I know you're doing something. I want in." Earl looked at the kid a long time. Then he brought him down the cellar and showed him the shoebox, and the butcher paper with the 2 columns, and Tom Doyle's card laid on top. And he explained it all in that flat, slow voice. The 25 signatures, the 30-day window, Article 11, Section 4. And Denny, who everybody figured for a company kid, a go-along kid, got a look on his face that Earl hadn't seen on a young man in years. "How many you got?" Denny said. 19, Earl said. "I need 6 more I can trust. Men paid up. Men who won't run to Ray." "Night shift," Denny said. "I can get you night shift. Ray never talks to those guys. Half of them, he doesn't know their names." And Denny did. Over the next 10 days, Denny Ref walked the night shift with a clipboard, like he was doing safety counts. And one by one, he got the names. Not by making speeches. Denny had learned something from watching Earl. He just showed each man the 1 page. The page with the 2 columns. The dues they paid, and the money that wasn't there. He didn't have to say much after that. A man looks at that page, and he signs. 6 names. Then a 7th, for luck. 26 signatures for a petition that needed 25, because Earl Danko had checked a gauge twice for 26 years, and he was not about to hand the International a page with exactly the minimum and let some lawyer throw 1 name out on a technicality. The second quiet person was Helen. Earl went Sunday, like always, with the groceries he couldn't quite afford. Bread and eggs and a little ham and the coffee she liked. He set the bag on her counter, and she made him sit and have a cup, like always. And they talked about Tom a little, like always. And then Helen said something that stopped Earl's cup halfway to his mouth. "I found Tom's papers," she said, "in the cedar chest. I was looking for his good watch to give to my nephew, and I found the whole folder. The letters from the union. The one that said no." Earl set the cup down. "You kept the denial letter?" he said. "I keep everything," Helen said. "You know that. Tom used to say I could find a receipt from the Roosevelt administration if you gave me an hour." She got it for him. It was on the fund's own letterhead, Local 419 Benefit Fund, signed at the bottom by Marty Quiat, Treasurer, and it said that the survivor benefit in the amount of $214 per month could not be processed at this time due to incomplete documentation, and that the fund regretted any inconvenience. Incomplete documentation. For a man who'd paid $9.25 a week for 19 years without missing one. Earl held that letter like it was made of glass, because it was the one thing his shoebox couldn't give him. His carbons proved the fund was short. His butcher paper proved the pattern. But this was Marty Quiat's own signature on the fund's own paper, denying a widow her husband's money with a lie about paperwork. This was the corroboration. This closed the circle. "Can I take this, Helen?" Earl said. "I'll bring it back. I'll bring it back to you framed if it goes the way I think." Helen looked at him. She was 50 years old, and she had buried a husband and been robbed by the men who buried him with her, and she was nobody's fool. "Earl Danko," she said, "what have you been doing?" "Counting," Earl said. "I've been counting, Helen." She let him take the letter. She didn't ask anything else. She just put her hand over his, the old woman's hand over the old man's hand. And neither one of them said Tom's name, but he was in the room anyway, the way he always was. That night, Earl copied Helen's letter into the file and sent the original of the padded hall contract page to the International, registered with a note. The third warning had been the meeting. This was the fourth. Everyone in writing. Everyone dated. Everyone with a carbon in the shoebox. Because Earl knew that when this finally broke, the first thing they'd say was that he never told anybody, never gave them a chance to fix it, sandbagged them out of spite. And Earl wanted the record to show 4 times. 4 times he told them, on paper, and 4 times they spit on it. Let them say he didn't warn them. The post office knew different. And here is where the irony turned, the way iron turns cherry in the furnace. Because up at the hall, Curtis Vane was doing the smartest dumb thing a man ever did. Vane, the company man, 46 years old, with his name sitting on a builder's deed down at the courthouse, where anybody could read it if anybody thought to look. Vane got the same nervousness Ray had, and Vane decided the way to beat an audit was speed. Close the vote first. Ratify the crooked hall contract in front of 200 men. Get it signed. Get it legal, before any trustee could freeze it. So Vane moved the ratification meeting up to the first Tuesday of December. He put out the notice. Mandatory meeting. All members. Ratification of the new hall construction contract. Refreshments served. He called the whole local into one room. He rented the chairs. 150 folding chairs, and standing room for the rest. He gathered every witness Earl could ever want, and he sat them down, and he did it thinking he was slamming a door. He was building a stage. The meeting was on a Tuesday. The petition had been docketed on a Monday. The 30-day window had opened the day before Curtis Vane called 200 men into a room to watch Earl Danko spring it. Only one of the 2 runners knew he was in a race, and that runner had reached the tape a full day before the other one heard the gun. Earl found out the window was open the way he found out everything. Certified mail. The green card came back Monday, and Monday afternoon the docket notice came, the official one, with the file number and the date, and the words, "Trusteeship petition received and docketed, pursuant to Article 11, Section 4. 30 days, starting now." Earl read it twice at his kitchen table. Then he read the meeting notice next to it. First Tuesday of December. Tomorrow. He sat there a while. Then he went down the cellar, and he got the shoebox. He took Tom's card off the top, and he put it in his shirt pocket, buttoned over his heart, next to the 2 receipts. He put the lid on the box. He put the box in a paper grocery sack, the same kind he carried Helen's groceries in, so no one would look at it twice. A slow man carrying a grocery sack, nobody looks at that. Nobody ever had. He went to bed. He slept, too, which surprised him. He'd expected not to. The hall on Tuesday night was full and loud and warm with too many bodies. The folding chairs were all taken. Men stood along the back wall, and Earl stood with them, at the very back, by the coat rack, his grocery sack down between his feet, and his lunch pail beside it, because he'd come straight from his shift, and a man carries his pail. Up front, on the little stage, was the long table. Ray Szczepanski sat in the middle behind the gavel. Marty Quiet sat to his right with a folder of papers. And off to the side, not at the table, just close to it, in a good gray suit that didn't belong in a union hall, sat Curtis Vane, the company's man, here to watch his labor piece get voted in. Ray banged the gavel. He ran through the business fast. He wanted this done. You could see he wanted it done. He read the resolution to ratify the hall contract in a bored voice, the numbers going by too quick to catch. And then he said the words he'd been aiming at all night. "All in favor," Ray said. "We'll do this by voice. All in favor say aye." A rumble of ayes. 200 men who trusted their officers. "Any opposed?" Ray said, already lifting the gavel, already turning it into a formality. "Same sign, and then we'll—" "I'd like to be recognized." The voice came from the back, flat, plain, not loud. But the hall had gone to say the second I, and the room had that half-second of quiet. And into that quiet, the plain voice dropped like a wrench on a concrete floor. 200 heads turned. Earl Danko stood at the back wall with his grocery sack in his hand. Ray squinted down the length of the hall, and when he saw who it was, something loosened in his face, and he laughed. He actually laughed. Because this was Slow Earl, and Ray had a room full of 200 men, and there was no safer feeling in the world than being Ray Szczepanski looking at Earl Danko across a crowded hall. "Earl," Ray said, and he said it to the room, playing it. "We're voting, Earl. This ain't the time. Sit down. Oh, that's right." And here Ray got his grin. "Chairs are for men who talk, Earl." A few men laughed, the same laugh, the laugh from before. "I'm asking to be recognized under Article 11, Earl said. Section 4. It's my right as a member in good standing. You can look it up, Ray, or I can read it to you. I brought a copy." The laughing stopped. Because that was a specific thing to say. That was not a slow man's thing to say. Article and section said clean, like a man who'd read it. And Ray, who had never once in 11 years heard Earl Danko say a sentence with a number in it that wasn't a gauge reading, felt the first cold touch of something he didn't have a name for yet. "There's no motion on the floor for that," Ray said. His voice had lost the grin. "You're out of order. Sit down or leave." Article 11, Section 4 says a point of order raised by any member in good standing regarding the handling of fund monies is privileged, Earl said. "Privileged means it comes first, Ray, before the vote. It's in the bylaws you swore to. I can read that part too." And Earl started walking up the middle aisle. He walked the way he always walked, slow, unhurried. A gray man in gray work clothes with a paper grocery sack, walking up the center of the hall past 200 turned faces. And the walk was so ordinary that it was the most frightening thing any of them had ever seen. Because ordinary was walking toward that stage like it had a right to. Ray stood up. "Somebody get him." But nobody moved. That was the thing. Nobody moved to get him. Because 200 men were curious now, and a curious crowd is not a crowd that follows orders. Denny Ref was standing near the front, and Denny said loud, "Let him talk, Ray." And 3 or 4 others said it too. "Let him talk." And Ray Szczepanski looked out at his own local, and for the first time in 11 years, he did not have the room. Earl reached the stage. He didn't go up on it. He set his grocery sack on the corner of the long table, right there where everyone could see. And he took out the shoebox, and he took the lid off the shoebox. Then he looked out at the 200 men. And then he looked at Ray. And Earl Danko said the quietest, terrible thing. "You bet the whole thing," Earl said, "on me not reading the fine print." He let it sit. I read all of it. He reached into the box, and he took out the first stack of carbons, yellow and soft with age. And he took out a single sheet of butcher paper with 2 columns on it. And he laid them side by side on the table under the ceiling lights, where the men in the front rows could see. 1966, Earl said. "I was the assistant clerk of this fund. 2 years. Marty, you were still driving a forklift. Every week I posted the dues. $9.25 a man. I made a carbon of every ledger page, and I kept them, because that's how I was taught, and I never threw one away." He tapped the yellow sheets. "This is what the fund looked like when it was clean." He didn't raise his voice once. He read. He read the fund's own posted balances, the ones Marty stood up and reported at every meeting, the numbers the men clapped for. And then he read the carbons. And then he did the subtraction out loud, quarter by quarter, slow, the way a slow man does arithmetic, so that every man in that hall could follow every step, and not one of them could say later that they didn't understand it. Short, short again, short every quarter, a little at first, then more. 6 years of it. $286,000, Earl said. That's what's missing. Across 6 years. $286,000 of your money. The hall made a sound. Not a word. A sound. 200 men breathing in at once. And now Earl reached the part he'd built for. The part where each man got his turn. He turned first, not to Ray, but to Marty Kwiat. "Marty," Earl said, almost gentle, "stand up a second. I want to show these men something with your name on it." Marty didn't stand. Marty had gone the color of the butcher paper. Earl held up 2 sheets. "This is your posted total for the second quarter of last year," he said. "And this is the dues register for the same quarter. Now here's the funny thing. You marked 11 men delinquent that quarter. 11 men, you said, didn't pay. I've got their receipts. Some of them are sitting in this room. You can ask them. They paid. Every one. Cash to the steward, stamped and signed. But you marked them delinquent on the books, and the money they paid, it's not short by a random number, boys. It's short by exactly what those 11 men paid. To the penny." Earl set the sheets down. "Your signature's on the top of both pages, Marty. The register that says they paid, and the report that says they didn't. Same pen. Same night, looks like." A man in the 3rd row stood up. Big man. Earl didn't know his name. One of the delinquent 11. "I paid," the man said, and his voice shook. "I got my stamp. I paid." "I know you did," Earl said. "It's right here." "I move we remove Marty Kwiat as treasurer," the big man said, still standing. "Right now, tonight." And there was a roar behind it, and Marty Kwiat put his face in his hands at the officers' table in front of 200 men. And that was the first one down. Earl let the roar run a little. Then he raised one hand, just one, and it quieted, because they wanted to hear the rest. He turned toward the gray suit. "Mr. Vane," Earl said. Curtis Vane had already picked up his hat. "You don't have to stay for this part," Earl said. "But these men should hear it. This is the company's labor man. He negotiates against you at the table. Real tough, I hear. Now, the new hall we're voting on tonight. The contract Ray wants ratified in the next 5 minutes. It's padded $70,000 over any honest bid. I went down to the courthouse. I read the deed on the builder. And the builder's business address, boys, is the same address as Mr. Vane's house. It's a matter of public record. Anybody can read it. I made a copy of that, too." Vane was moving toward the side door now, quick, the good suit cutting through the standing men. "I already mailed it," Earl said to his back, not raising his voice, and Vane's step hitched. "Registered. To the International, 2 weeks ago. So it's not just a union matter anymore, Mr. Vane. Company money into a padded contract that kicks back to a company man. That's a federal fund matter now. You can walk out that door. The letter's already there." Curtis Vane went out the side door and did not look back, and did not vote. And that was the second one down, the quiet one, the one who fell by leaving. And now there was only Ray. Earl turned to him last. Ray was standing behind the gavel with both hands flat on the table, and the color was gone out of his big face. And he was looking at Earl the way you look at a machine that's come off its track and is coming for you slow, and there's no shutting it off. "Ray," Earl said, "you've got no proof any of this. $286,000, Ray, Earl said, right over him, still not loud, and the room shut up to hear it. Some of it's the skim I just showed you, and some of it's the survivor benefits, the death money, the money a man's family gets when the press takes him. Earl reached into his shirt pocket. He unbuttoned it, slow, and he took out Helen Doyle's denial letter, and he held it up. $214 a month, Earl said. That's what the fund owes Helen Doyle, Tom's widow. This is the letter your treasurer sent her. Says her paperwork was incomplete. Earl's voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter, and the quieter it went, the more the hall leaned in. Tom Doyle stood on the number 2 press for 19 years. Some of you stood next to him. He paid his $9.25 every week of those 19 years, and he never missed one, not one. And when the line finally killed him slow, the way it kills men slow, his wife got this, a form letter, incomplete documentation. And then Earl reached into his pocket one more time and took out the little laminated card. Thomas Doyle, member, Local 419, 19 years of dues stamps on it. And he held it up over his head under the ceiling lights so the whole hall could see it shine. This man paid his $9 every week for 19 years, Earl said. His widow got a form letter. He looked at Ray Szczepanski. You got a boat. The hall came apart. It wasn't a riot. It was worse than a riot for Ray. It was 200 men all talking at once, standing, turning to each other, the sound rising up into the rafters of the hall they'd been about to vote themselves into paying too much for. And every face that turned toward the stage now had the same thing on it, and it was not laughter. Slow Earl had been the joke of Local 419 for 26 years, and there was not one man laughing. Denny Ref was already up front. Denny had the petition, the real one, the trusteeship petition, the carbon of it, and Denny stood up on a folding chair so they could all see him, and he read it into the record in a loud, shaking young voice, all 26 signatures. And he said the words Earl had taught him, docketed, 30-day window, and he said the last part loud. The trustee from the International is already coming. It's already filed. As of yesterday, nobody at this table can move a dollar or sign that contract. It's frozen. It's done. And it was. That was the trap. That was the whole quiet trap. Sprung in public, lawful, clean. No fists, just paper. Just a slow man who kept his carbons. Ray sat down. He didn't decide to. His legs just did it. The vote never happened. There was no vote to have. The contract was frozen. The treasurer was finished. The company man was gone out the side door, and the president was sitting behind his own gavel with 200 of his own men looking at him like he was something scraped off the line. Earl put the papers back in the shoebox. He put the lid on. He put the box in the grocery sack. Then he picked up his lunch pail, because a man carries his pail, and he started back down the center aisle the way he'd come. The men parted for him. Some of them said things. Somebody said, "Earl," like it was a word they were learning. Somebody put a hand on his shoulder. Earl nodded at them the way he nodded at everything, and he kept walking, because he was tired, and because the thing was done, and a careful man doesn't stay to watch it burn. Ray caught him at the door.
He came off the stage and through the crowd fast and got to the push-bar door before Earl did, and he put his hand flat on the bar so Earl couldn't push it, and up close his face wasn't arrogant anymore. It was scared. It was an old, scared thing. "Earl," Ray said, low, just for the two of them. "Earl, come on. We can, look. Keep this in the family. You and me. We work something out. There's enough here for... We work something out, all right? Between us. Keep it in the family." It was the first time in 26 years Ray Szczepanski had ever said Earl's name soft. Earl looked at the hand on the bar. Then he looked at Ray. And when he answered, he wasn't angry. There wasn't any heat in it at all. And that was the thing Ray would remember. That there was no heat. "The families, these 200 men," Earl said. "Talk to them." He waited. Ray's hand came off the bar. Earl pushed the door open and went out into the December cold with his grocery sack and his lunch pail, and the door swung shut behind him on the noise, and it was very quiet out in the lot, and the stars were out over Rennick, Ohio, and Earl Danko stood a second in the cold and let his breath out slow, white in the dark. Then he drove home. He put the shoebox back in the cellar, and he went to bed because he had a shift in the morning. It went the way paper goes once it's moving. The trustee from the International came inside the week, a hard, quiet man with an accountant and a briefcase, and the 30-day freeze held. And inside that window, everything Earl had mailed for 6 months landed on the right desk at the right time, dated, witnessed, 4 warnings and all. 6 months on, the fund office was a different place. New paint, even. There was a new treasurer, elected clean. A machinist named for the job by the same men who used to clap for Marty's numbers without reading them. The hall contract was voided and put back out for honest bids and came back $40,000 cheaper. And nobody's name was on the builder's deed but the builder's. Helen Doyle got her pension, all of it. $214 a month, restored, with every month of back pay they'd stolen. A check thick enough that she cried at the counter, signing for it. And the new treasurer came around the counter and held her arm while she did. She had Tom's union card framed, put it on the wall by the door where she'd see it going in and out. And the Sunday after the back pay came, when Earl brought the groceries like he always did, she wouldn't let him carry them in. She sat him down. She put something in his hand and closed his fingers over it. It was the brass dues stamp off Tom's old kit. The little brass die that used to stamp the card, 19 years of stamps, 9 1/4 each. "He'd want you to have it," Helen said. "You're the only one who ever counted, Earl." Earl couldn't say anything for a minute. He just held the little brass thing in his hand, warm from her hand. "I'll keep it good," he finally said. As for the rest of them, Ray Szczepanski was removed, then indicted. The federal people took over from there, and the boat everybody had seen and nobody had asked about. The boat sold at auction that spring, and the money went back to the fund where it started. Curtis Vane was quietly let go by the company. No announcement. A company man is only useful while he's clean, and once he wasn't, he was just gone, the way they go. Marty Kwiat testified. Against Ray, against Vane, everybody. Marty always did the thing that kept Marty covered, right to the end, and it bought him a lighter fall. And nobody at Local 419 ever said his name again, except to spit it. And Earl Danko went back to his 40 feet of floor. He still sweeps it. Same broom, near enough. Same corner by the die racks. He comes in at 6, and he walks it up and back, and he checks his gauge twice, and he carries out the gray pile. He's still called Earl, just Earl now. Nobody in Rennick, Ohio has called him Slow Earl in 6 months, and the young ones coming up don't even know that was ever a name. He keeps Tom's brass dues stamp in the drawer at home. next to the shoebox he never quite got rid of. And once in a while, some new kid on the line, some kid who wasn't there, hears the story secondhand and doesn't believe it, and looks at the quiet old man pushing a broom and can't square it, can't see it, how that man brought down the whole ring with a box of old carbons and never raised his voice once.
Earl doesn't explain it to them. He never explains anything. But every so often, when one of them pushes, he'll stop and lean on the broom a second and say the one thing he knows for certain in that flat, slow voice that took 200 men apart in a rented hall. A quiet man isn't a slow man, Earl says. He's just counting while you talk. Then he goes back to his floor. Wherever you're watching this from, do me one thing. Comment your town, the town you're sitting in right now. I want to see how far Earl Danko travels.